on this episode, we just have a little chat about brake lever angle. Quite a common discussion we get from clients in our camps and clinics through the summer is where they should have their brake levers, and it's such a small but really impactful thing that you can do to your bike setup, because it can make a big difference to comfort, control, hand fatigue, all those kind of things. So the standard info we often hear out there is follows the angle of your forearm when you're sort of standing up in that neutral position, ready to descend and control the bike. So that's what we like to refer to as kind of a good baseline setting to start from. We always try and talk about bike setup in terms of sort of pros and cons rather than right and wrong, because the reality is, bike setup is a little bit different for each rider. But one place we like to start is if everybody has a solid baseline, it's not too extreme either way, then it's probably going to work for most riders most of the time. And that would be our first tip, is people often from a too early stage try and get this hyper personalized bike setup, and more often than not they end up doing some funky things. And if they just sort of stuck to a fairly generic bike setup, in many cases it's often better than what they actually have. And indeed we see proof of that every summer with clients' bikes, and we just almost a lot of the time we're reverting the bike back to sort of a neutral setup. And 9 times out of 10 it's better than what they turned up to the camp or the clinic with. But beyond that, once you've got that baseline set in, things aren't too extreme either way. We can then start to personalize it and refine it. And a good example of this brake lever. So if you look at my brake levers here, I'm just going to flip the old camera here if I can. Oh, no, I can't. So I'm just going to flip it around. You're going to see my brake lever is a little bit flatter than probably the angle of my forearm here. So rather than the brake lever kind of following the angle of my forearm, it's a little bit flatter, but not too flat. And the reason for that, the logic behind that, is we try and think about our handlebar setup in terms of grip, but also the ability to push and weight the bike. And when you want to push a bike, try and push it with a little kink in your wrist like this. And I mean push down, and then try and push with your wrist completely on top of the grip, as if your levers were following your angle of your forearm. And you'll notice that this feels a little stronger, because essentially biomechanically this is how you would push off a table or do a push-up. You have this solid platform now with your hand to push down in the bike and or resist if you get an impact or a force coming up. This is going to be a stronger position biomechanically than this. And again, there's pros and cons. There's not right or wrong. The reality is there's probably truth behind this, and the sweet spot might be somewhere in the middle. And indeed, that's what I have on my setup here. So try and think about that this week with your bike setup. Try and find that angle where you're standing up on the bike and it just follows the same angle as your forearm, and then maybe raise the levers a little bit and a little bit flatter. It allows a little bit of a flex in the wrist, and you might find you feel stronger when it comes to pumping the front end and pushing down on the front end, or resisting or pushing against any impacts on the front end. And to be honest, I tried this a couple of seasons ago. Got some good information from Todd Shumlick, who Form X manager and coaches a lot of World Cup races, and he was talking about brake lever position and forearm pump. And I'm always open to new ideas. I've been coaching mountain biking for 20 years, but if someone shows me something different, I'm going to try it. And I didn't like it at first, for sure. It just felt too weird. It kind of felt like it pushed me in the back seat. But over time, I started to kind of realize the pros more than I felt the cons. And that's my final takeaway for bike setup is keep experimenting, keep exploring, no matter how many years you've been biking. And that way you can find those little extra percentages, I call them, around the bike. If your brake lever position is 2% better, your tire pressure is 1% better, your handlebar height is 3% better, all those little things add up. And again, equipment can be a really great place to start when it comes to improving your confidence and control, speed on the bike. And bike setup is free, so educate yourself, get into it, don't be afraid to try things, and if all else fails, put it back to that sort of neutral position you started with, and you haven't lost anything. Okay, so take it easy, just adjust one thing at a time. I like to, when I try bike setup things, I like to try and ride familiar trails that I know well, that are fairly easy, and that way I can really focus on the bike and how the bike feels, rather than being in survival mode and not being able to think about the bike at all. So just some extra tips there as well when you're going through bike setup. So try that out, tell us what you think in the comments, and we'll add some more info on the next episode. Thanks, guys.